All right, everyone. I am really excited to be joined today with Jackie from Sheesh Hash Cola. And I was hoping that we could start out just by you telling me, of course, the phone rings. I thought I unplugged it.
Right on
Um,
cue.
uh, you know what? Just a second.
Yeah, no worries.
Sorry about that.
No
I'll be
worries.
able to edit that out anyway. So I'll have to edit that out. I thought I unplugged it. And I live with my dad now, and he's
Look at
93. So he
that.
still has a landline.
Hey, that will be safe one day.
Yeah, I know, I know. So if you could just take a minute to introduce yourself to the listeners of Bite Me.
Sure. Well, my background is primarily in beverage alcohol. So I spent just over 11 years as a senior buyer at the LCBO, covering categories like white spirits, ready to drink, beer, and then most of my career was spent as the vintages wine buyer. So I got to
Oh,
you know, travel the world a little bit, more at home actually, and find fantastic wines that we would sell at the 600 plus stores in the network.
right. And for those who aren't familiar with the LCBO, that's the Liquor Control Board of Ontario, which is also, from what I've recently learned, the largest alcohol buyer in the entire world. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
it kind
Yeah.
of goes back to back. Sometimes I've heard it's Walmart
Mm,
is, but correct. We were one of the top two for sure.
right. So
Yeah,
you have extensive experience in the alcohol industry.
yeah,
But you switched industries. You went from alcohol to cannabis,
I did.
and I'm just wondering what was the defining moment where you're like, "I'm going to take this leap?" Because obviously too, the cannabis industry in Canada is just it's very nascent still.
Right. Right. There's actually two events that took place that kind of collided and got me to make the switch. So, the first thing, I got a back injury. I had a back injury, and I tried all the typical pharmaceuticals you would expect. And a friend told me, "You've got to try, you've definitely got to try CBD." And I kind of looked at them. I'm going to be honest. I had the stigma going on, and I was thinking, I don't know. I tried it. I cannot. But for me, and I'm not saying it will solve everyone's problems, but for me, it certainly helped night and day. I was able to kind of be pain free. That got me really starting to research cannabis and understand the plant, understand the dynamics of it, what it could offer my life, and really trying to get my head around the stigma that I grew up with and lived with for so long. So that was happening on one hand. And on the other hand, I resigned from the LCBO and I was doing a lot of consulting work that was turning into NPD, which is new product development. My passion is innovation, right? So it got to a point though that I was doing so much NPD and it was all spritzers. Like, and I'm not kidding. Okay. In 1 week, I would get 2 to 3 calls saying, we'd like to do a vodka spritzer. And honestly, it killed my soul in terms of innovation because it was all the same. If you've ever been to an alcohol store recently and look at the spritzer section, you'll see there's 50 of the same, right? And it literally squashed my excitement for the industry over time. So you have on one hand this new and exciting thing that Canada is on, is kind of leading in terms of um, national legalization and innovation. And then on the other side, I know it works because of what happened with my back. And then on the other side, I'm flailing in innovation over in alcohol, and it made total sense. It just made total sense, and I got very excited. And I always say, if you want to know what's important to something or to someone, it's important you almost like plug your ears and watch where they're spending their time and where their actions are going. And I was finding myself 2, 3, 4 in the morning up reading about cannabis,
Hmm.
right? Which was telling. And there's a moment I stepped back and said, you know what? I'm excited about this. I'm going to do it. I put my first resume together in 17 years, and I got a job as a director at Hexo. At the time, it was one of the largest licensed producers in Canada. As director for flower, edibles, and pre rolls. I had a lot of learning to do, Margaret. A lot.
I bet. I bet. And was there anything in particular that you were reading that really stood out?
Oh, I was astonished how similar to wine the cannabis industry is. It's shocking. Like when you think about even just I'm just bringing it down to the most basic thing. What's so great about wine is provenance, meaning a sense of place, a sense of people, understanding where something comes from. I started reading about the provenance of cannabis strains, right? Like things like the Hayes brothers from California in the 60s and 70s created, the Hayes strain. Um, and I kind of went and thought, okay, there's a sense of people. There's definitely a sense of place. That started in California. We know that, landrace strain started overseas, and there's a lot of things there that are completely synergistic with what we are excited about, what we love, and what we enjoy about wine.
Right. And you mentioned the provenance. I guess some people might understand that too as terroir as well.
Yes,
And just sort of
exactly.
like I like to go to Prince Edward County to enjoy the Pinot Noir because it's known for that particular grape. Just like in California, if you grow certain cultivars there, it's going to taste and smell and be enjoyed differently than a cultivar that's been grown somewhere else
A
because of
hundred.
the unique things about that place, which it makes it really interesting and definitely helps people understand cannabis in terms if they're more of a wine person or an alcohol drinker, I
I
guess.
agree. Well,
Yeah.
that's what was happening to me. Every bit of information I was taking in, whether it be at Hexo or in my reading, I was translating like my first language was English, or like my first, it is English, but my first language was wine. And I was
Right,
transitioning into that. And I realized like how much of it made complete sense. Even
right.
like, yeah, and I know a lot of cannabis loyalists don't buy into this as much, but I mean, indica sativa hybrid, it does exist. I know every plant has a little bit of both, but when you look at an indica, when you're having it, you're relaxed. It's kind of heavier, right? That feel, that's like a heavy red wine, like a Cabernet.
Mhm.
Sativa, lighter, kind of during the day, right? To me, that's like a Pinot Grigio, right? During the day.
Right.
And then obviously hybrid, a rosé, right? A blend of both. You kind of get the best
Yeah,
of
and
both.
obviously it's a little more nuanced than that because indica sativa is sort of like red versus white wine. And obviously we
Yes.
both know that red and white wine as those 2 categories are like incredibly broad. And there's a lot of nuance within those categories, and that's similar to cannabis as well. But what have been your biggest challenges with
Mm.
like moving from one industry to the next?
Right. Well, there's a couple. I'm going to say there's three challenges that really come to mind. The first one, you're going from an industry that has uh, not quite since prohibition, but I'm about 100 years behind it, right? Of baselines, of understanding the customer, understanding the marketing, understanding the legalities, right? And alcohol is it's everywhere, right? I was at a concert last night. I saw ads everywhere. So you're going from that industry. And I think a lot of us thought when cannabis was going to legalize, there would be more commonalities, I guess, with alcohol in terms of what would be allowed from communication, education, marketing, things like that. And that's not the case. So the first challenge has been understanding that, one industry is being served at a church for wine on Sundays, and the other one is rehabilitating from a stint in jail. And we're just kind of, you know, coming through that as an
Mhm.
industry, and it's understanding that it's not the same and we need to handle them differently. So that took some time for me to get my head around and know that with a new industry comes a lot of new challenges, right? So part one is that. Part two, stigma, right? I came from wine. I have my friends are all into wine. I have wine nights, right? I go to wine dinners. We own a small part of a winery. I'm very engaged in wine still. There is always that place in my heart, and I love it. Um, but I mean, it's sometimes I almost they're like, so what are you doing now? What are you interested in? And I have to take a little second breath, Okay, I'm in cannabis. I own a cannabis company. I consult. I still do a lot of alcohol consulting as well, but and I'm gonna say a solid 7 out of 10. Even in Canada, I get the brow, the kind of head tilt going,
Mm.
"Cannabis." Exactly, right? A little bit of that, and I can't help myself but start going into, like I did here, a little bit of a soapbox on the synergies that between the two industries. And when I start explaining it, like even, the beverage I have, we use um, a local cherry farm for our juice, right, to sweeten it. And it's in wine country here in Canada. And I said, we use Cherry Lane Farm. And they're like, what? That's in wine company. I'm like, right, there's quality can happen in cannabis. And, so but battling that stigma has been, on one hand, a challenge, another hand, a lot of fun because
Mhm.
I welcome the opportunity to challenge things like that. And the last thing is it's very much still a boys' club.
Mm.
Cannabis definitely has that. I'm very fortunate in my cannabis business. I have a wonderful business partner, Matt Cherkis, who is just an excellent human and an excellent business partner. So I do find though there are partnerships, there are suppliers and vendors that Matt has to have the first point of contact, or the point of contact, or I don't get a response sometimes. Things like that,
Mm.
that I would not expect in this day and age, and I certainly didn't see in more mature market. So I think over time we're going to see that balance out. But right now, I still do find that a challenge.
Right. So you are dealing with just the fact that cannabis is like 100 years behind as far as prohibition goes,
Mhm.
which does halt a lot of progress in a lot of areas like research and education, all that kind of thing. And then you're wearing the education hat as well every time somebody asks you about cannabis because they don't understand it the way you do. And then the boys club, I'm sort of surprised to hear that because like you mentioned like more mature markets like perhaps the alcohol industry.
Mm.
Why do you think that there's so much more sexism in cannabis than there would be in other industries?
I don't know the answer to that. I've thought about it a little bit, and what I guess this would be a guess at this point, but I think because the legacy market is so much legacy market has matured into the legal market.
Mhm.
Maybe the legacy market was more dominated by males at the time, and
Right.
it just there are some great legacy female pioneers and people in the market that are doing great. But I would say for the most part, if we look at the top positions and the top organizations in general, there's a few exceptions, and we look at many of the LPs, we would see that exists for sure.
Right. And do you see it changing at all now that you've been a little more involved in the industry?
You know, it has to. I think it has to. Just the more this industry is looking for, the best talent. It's not that females are always the best talent, but I'm saying
Mhm.
when you look at the ratio, it's going to net out at some point that the best talent should equal, a higher percentage than it is now. At least, somewhere in the 50-50 would be great. Um, and I think as more and more women succeed in the industry and lean in and help one another, which is key, right? Lean in,
Mhm.
support, and help one another. I think, there's no way it can't
Right.
balance out over time. So, I really challenge myself when I recognize this to really, like any, female entrepreneur in the space, anyone looking to do anything in the space or wanting to learn, um, I do try to lean in, but when it's a female doing it, I try to you know, help them rise above as well because I know it's a challenge that we all have. So.
Right. And I think just culturally speaking, things are changing right now at an interesting rate. And so just across the board, things are starting to change, the language is starting to change, but it always seems so slow. Change always seems so slow when you want it to happen. But I love what you're talking about, like leaning in and helping other women entrepreneurs and women in that space, because I love the idea of collaboration versus competition.
Yeah,
And I really think that's such a positive way forward too, because it's just the competition has sort of gotten us to a certain place. And it can only go so far if we're competing against each other instead of supporting. And I think there's room for all kinds of people in the cannabis industry anyway, and it's required.
I agree. It's a very dynamic group in general,
Mhm.
diverse group, and to your point, what's happening in society inevitably will, trickle into this industry for sure. So
Yeah. I think we all just wish it was a little faster, but it's happening. So,
that's right. That's right.
yeah. Yeah. How did your experience in the alcohol industry like shape your approach to launching a cannabis beverage?
Yeah, it when you look at the beverage, so the beverage line I have right now is called Sheesh Hash Sodas. Okay. And Sheesh is currently in Canada the only beverage using live rosin hash. So when you ask me how it was shaped through alcohol, in so many ways it was. So, you know, when I look at, I'm sorry, I have to bring it back to wine. You knew it was coming.
Yeah.
You know it's coming. But when you look at a wine that I love, I have one in mind. It's a Pinot Noir out of California. What I love again the provenance. I love knowing where it's from. I love knowing who made it. I love that it's a single varietal, right? So it's a single grape making that wine, big flavors and clean. You know what I mean? The process is
Mhm.
clean. It's good. It's a really good place. I've been there. Now, when I looked at approaching a beverage, there's two things. There's, what I like, which isn't really important. It's what consumers want, right? But I did identify a really big white space. So last August, I ran a quick report. There was a 211 cannabis beverages in Canada. Every one of them, except maybe one, Zealy, but we're using distillate, right? And when you think of alcohol, distillate would be what we call NGS, like neutral grain spirit, or moonshine, like it's just stripped alcohol,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And so I look at distillate like that. And what I wanted to do was have a strong point of difference that people value, which is, quality. Uh, people value quality and understanding. And number two, bring all of those things I loved about wine into this space. So what we developed by using rosin, there's no solvents. So it's a clean
Mhm.
alcohol, or it's a clean version of THC. Also, a lot of the plant's integrity is kept in a delicate way throughout the process, right? So the terpenes are still there, elements of the plant are still there, and they're not stripped away, right? Um, Also, beyond that, when I talked about single varietal, I can tell you exactly where it was grown. BC outdoor, we just signed a deal actually. BC outdoor organic cannabis, right? We,
Beautiful.
yeah, we chose the strain to grow, right? We love it. And so, it's single origin, single source, single, strain. And it starts with that. So as long, the cannabis input is top grade. And then beyond that, because let's be honest, 80% of the drink is not the cannabis, it's
Mhm.
what else is in it. We took care. We didn't just add artificial flavors like the other, almost all. There's a couple exceptions, products. So again, our first launch was cherry cola. So there's like cinnamon, there's ginger, there's like these natural ingredients in it. And then of course I sourced the cherry juice from a local farm. We can tell you who grew that, where that's grown. So it brings that provenance together. So when I say it was influenced by alcohol, it really was, but not the way a lot of other companies did, where they're like, okay, it's going to replace beer. So we're going to make a beer with distillate in it. it's about the care, the thought, the people, the place, and bringing that together in a beverage.
I love that because there's just something that's so unique about a beverage that when you're like, I know the farm where the cherries were grown or the organic cannabis, like that's just to me what I want to consume anyway. And like, yeah, there's lots of distillate drinks on the market and some of them are good, but when you have that kind of quality ingredient going into a beverage, I think it just makes it taste so much better. And sheesh hash colas do taste fantastic.
Oh,
I've
thank
had
you.
them before. I do love them. And that's just I mean, I'm someone who likes to shop farmers markets, and when I'm buying edibles, I like ones where, the person knows where the cannabis was grown, like all that stuff. And I definitely think there's consumers out there who are looking for that because distillate will provide a certain experience. Usually it's more to me a flash in the pan kind of high,
Yeah.
and I just don't think it's the same as obviously it's not because it's been stripped down of all its components and you get that sort of very single dimensional kind of effect from that. So I think that's beautiful and another reason why people should be buying your colas as well. And I find and also like you said there's 211 beverages in Canada. I didn't know that. I don't know how many are available in Ontario where we are, but a lot of the ones that are on the market are probably kinda like the spritzers you were talking about in the alcohol industry. It's like, a sparkling water with a splash of distillate and a little hint of flavor,
Right.
and then they charge you $7 for that drink plus tax.
Right.
And, there's some advantages, I guess. They're sugar-free or whatever, but as far as an experience goes, they're kind of not that exciting either.
Yeah, you bring up an amazing point too. One of the hardest things for me to get my head around, I specialize in category management. So digging down analysis, like really understanding. So you would think that beverages popular outside of cannabis would be what would drive popularity in cannabis, right? Like you would think
Mhm.
spritzers or natural kombuchas, like things like that. And they haven't. That has not resonated. And I've
Hmm.
spent a lot of time trying to figure out why. And because I get the question, why did you develop a cola, like a soda? Right? It has sugar in it. It's not light in sugar. And I wanted something that tasted delicious and expressed the best. That's for, to start. Not saying we won't go there in the future, but realistically, it came down to the fact that products outside of cannabis just are not selling within. And I think the reason part of it is that people are only having one or two, right?
Mhm.
You're having one beverage, maybe you can consume more sugar, right?
Right.
Um, and if you're having one beverage to kind of celebrate throughout the night or two, right? You're more willing to do that. Where as the other ones, you might be having five or six. It's called sessionability in the
Mhm.
industry, and I think that that's a part of it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because yeah, obviously, if you're gonna drink 5 of them, then the sugar content suddenly does become a little more important.
Right,
But if you're drinking 1 or half of one, then, yeah, you can say, "Well, I'll not have dessert tonight, and I'll have my cola instead," which I
right.
think is a way better way better option. But I'm probably a little bit biased because I love edibles, so yeah, yeah. So what was, like, the most surprising thing that you've learned about cannabis while you're developing your product or by using it in your own life? Because, like, have you been a long time cannabis consumer?
I dabbled in it, but not really. I always hid behind my glass of wine, right? I'd
Right.
go to a party and everyone knew me as wine, so I'd be like, "No, I'm good, right? I've got my run back to the wine cooler situation." But what would the biggest surprise be? That's a really good question. Um, I would have to say how quickly I've made a place for it in my life. Would be you couldn't convince me, right? 5 years ago, like I pick a lane. I'm not someone typically. I mean, there is an occasion, but where I would say, okay, I'm having cannabis and alcohol. I tend not to mix them.
Mhm.
Now, there are times I will have cannabis and have a glass of wine because I
Mhm.
find cannabis heightens my senses.
It does, yes.
So, yeah, so having my favorite glass of wine, I taste it tastes crazy
Mm.
crazy good, right? So There are times I will enjoy a small glass of wine with it, but generally speaking, I pick through the night. And I'm surprised how many times my partner and I will go for dinner and we'll take an Uber and we'll be like, okay, normally I get a bottle of wine, right? That's $80 minimum at a restaurant, right?
Mhm,
And
mhm.
instead, we're like in the Uber saying, "How many gummies do you want?" You know, and and we have, I have my 6 milligrams. I am happy throughout that dinner. I'm tasting it. It tastes amazing. I wake up great the next morning. I sleep well. So my biggest surprise has been how much having an occasion for it in my life has added to my life. Saved
Right.
me money, probably saved me calories over the long run, the sugar. So it's been
Yeah.
nice. I still nothing will replace, wine in my life completely. And I still do enjoy it, but I certainly have a place in my life for cannabis now.
And how easy, and you mentioned how easy it was for it to become a regular part of your life,
Yeah.
because that bottle of wine that you buy at dinner as well, I love wine too, but I can't drink the 2 glasses of wine anymore without waking up with a headache or feeling tired. Like, the effects are very noticeable as I get older.
Yeah.
And, there used to be a time where I could polish off a bottle of wine and wake up skipping out of bed the next morning, but that is no longer my reality. And of course, I hear more and more about the effects of alcohol on the body as
Right.
far as health goes and the impacts, and you just don't have that with cannabis. And food and beverage is such an easy way for it to be incorporated into your life. So if you don't want to smoke, there's definitely so many options for it to be used in your life. So I do appreciate what you're talking about.
I agree. I agree. And as far as sheesh, the beverage goes, like I fancy it up. I have ice. I make it an occasion. Do you know what I mean? Just like
Yeah.
I did wine. I have wine glasses. I have a sheesh glass. It's
Right, and you
real.
can make it an experience just like somebody who's rolling a joint can make a little ritual out of that, but then you can also create that around the beverages that you're drinking or the edibles that you're enjoying or whatever, just that
Right?
ritual.
Yeah, and it's interesting. One thing I learned in the wine industry is how important it was to people to be able to talk about unique points of their wine, like who made it or some unique story. And I find when I have those little nuggets of information and share it with people about cannabis during it, the occasion is bang on.
Right.
It's
Yeah,
really neat. Yeah.
yeah. Now, the name of the cola sheesh, I mean, I had this question prepared, and of course,
Mhm.
sheesh is short for hashish, but what was the sort of logic or the story behind the name Sheesh Hash Colas?
I 100% got to give that to my partner Matt.
Okay.
We had a list of 20 names. We out of the gate we financed the whole thing. Like we did not have agencies, right? This was very much. It still is just Matt and I, right?
Mhm, mhm.
And we had this list of 20. I have, big hitter. Like my best friend was a vice president at LG, some big companies, right, in marketing. And he has the same circle. So we sent our 20 names. People picked. There were some ones that were okay. I'm trying to remember, like nice, like different, like, nothing I'm proud to say here, actually. Just maybe an agency would have been a good idea. But Matt called and he's like, "Hey, I have one. I think you're gonna love it. Sheesh." And I right away I cut it down. I'm like, "No, that's a teenager rolling their eyes at their mom." You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
and I couldn't get my head around it. And Matt, one of his greatest assets is his persistence. So after I killed it, I'm so glad he brought it back to me again. And the name just it's quick, it's easy to remember. Um, our tagline is "That's good," and that came from people that would
Mm.
drink it and joke. They're like, "Sheesh, that's good," right? And we're like, "Yeah, that's
That's
good,"
awesome.
right? Take
Yeah,
that, marketing agencies. No,
yeah.
and the truth is, it was his brainchild, and it works. And soon as we got our head around it, or let me rephrase that. Soon as I got my head around it,
Right.
we ran and we're like, yeah, this is the thing.
So what changed for you then? Because, like, when you said "sheesh" and it's like a teenager rolling their eyes at your parent, like, my kids are adults now, but they rolled their eyes at me a ton,
Yeah,
of course, but that never occurred to me. Like, I thought "sheesh" as in hashish, but
yeah,
the "sheesh" as in, "Oh god, mom," like, that never that never occurred to me.
Yeah, and I gotta say it wasn't a favorite in my marketing circle. Like, I sent it out, everyone's like, "No, no." So it just it works when you think about, what we're creating, our point of difference. Okay, the biggest thing I have learned in my career as a buyer, whether it be when I was with Canadian Tire, Unilever here, if you're not going to have a relevant point of difference for a consumer, don't show up, right? Our point of difference, there's a few. We care about a lot of elements that are unique, but is that we use really good quality hash, right? Rosin. So it only makes sense that our name kind of gives a nod to that. So Sheesh became, it's a nice, easy name. It's marketable. And most importantly, it represents our point of difference.
Right. And I like that you mentioned the tagline. That's good.
Yeah.
'Cause it's simple and it came from the people, like you said. So that's nice. I mean, that's good.
Yeah.
That's really good. And naming is so hard too. Like I have to come up with a name for a podcast episode every week, and I'm just like, oh, like that's the worst part of the whole process, honestly.
Yeah.
So
Well, you could. I'm just actually looking. So you could hire an agency, or Matt's available.
right.
Just saying.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm not prepared to do that. So
Yeah.
not for a weekly podcast episode, but if you, I mean, a product name that's going to live with you forever. Like, rebranding is not something to be taken lightly. So when you have a product that you're putting out there and you're doing the marketing and you're printing like marketing stuff, it's you got to really like really like the name. So
Totally. It's
yeah.
funny. One of the things we did, and we've done a little bit of activation with this, but it's something we're going to do more of, is we actually bought the rights to a hotline. So we have this
Oh, fun.
number, 1-833 potline. And
Oh,
what we
that's
ask
awesome.
people to do on the potline is call, right, 24/7, and tell us about your experience with sheesh or what's going on when you're high. And we are getting some messages.
So that's already live?
Yeah, we've had
Okay.
it live since we started, but we haven't really promoted it. We haven't
Right.
done anything really too much. Um, we have had some people call in. It's been fun, but to your point, when you're kind of starting out doing your own thing, this was a way to kind of interact and do something a little different.
Yeah, I love that stuff too because when people call a line as well, I don't know if you can reply to them or not, but it's always nice to hear somebody's voice
Yeah.
when they're interacting because it just obviously lends a whole lot more context and nuance when you're listening to a message when it's just versus text when they're sending some kind of email or text message or whatever the case might be. But and now maybe you've already talked about this a little bit, but do you have any funny or unexpected stories from the process of creating Sheesh
Oh, funny
or
story.
sharing it or
Yeah, I do have one actually. I have a really good friend, and we were up at the cottage, and she's a wine. She was in the wine industry as well. She currently is. And she goes, "So tell me about this project you're doing. Like, what's going on with this thing?" And I said, "Well, it's a cannabis beverage." And she goes, "Okay, I'm gonna have to try it." And I did my spiel. I said, "Here are the ingredients. It's like single strain." I brought her through the whole thing. And she goes, "Okay, I'm gonna try it, but I don't do cannabis." I'm like, "Right." So I handed her the can, and the can says black cherry hash cola, right? So I go into the cottage, I come out, she hasn't opened it, she's looking at it, she goes, "Jackie, this says hash on it." And I'm like, "Yeah?" She goes, "Is hash even legal?" Is that and she was serious. She's like, "Is it even legal?" I'm like, "Of course it is." I said, "Do you know what hash is?" She goes, "Yeah, that's like hardcore drugs, Jackie."
Hardcore drugs. Okay,
I'm
that's
like,
so
"That's
cute.
hardcore drugs." And then and it hit me. I'm like, "Okay, right, right. I need to take the ball back a couple bounces." So I explained it like ice wine. Ice wine, because ours is cold extracted. It's extracted when it's frozen. So you only get that
Mm,
best of the best keef, right?
mhm.
And the rest of the plant's discarded. Ice wine's that way too. It's a frozen grape. You only get the little sweetest bit of
Right,
juice and it's discarded, right?
right.
I said, and because it's concentrated, it's so sweet. Just like hash, it's concentrated, it's so strong, right?
Mhm.
And I had to kind of explain that process. And I said, hash is cannabis. And it was like this epiphany that,
That's so interesting.
yeah. And it's just really premium, best of the best part that is
Right.
hash is, right?
Yeah.
It was like a complete eye opening for both of us. Me understanding, wow, that's part of something I need to, communicate. And from her end, well, she learned.
And did she enjoy it? That's the real question.
Yeah, yeah, she
Yeah.
did.
So
Yeah.
is she a new convert perhaps?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
time for it, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
That and I just found that interesting too because I personally didn't realize that ice wine and I've drank a few ice wines, but
Mm,
I didn't realize that was processed. Maybe I knew, but the frozen grapes, then you discard it. Like that sounds exactly like the process of extracting the rosin like you were talking about.
correct,
Yeah.
correct.
So linking that known to the unknown for people who are well more versed in the wine, again, that's another beautiful example
Mhm.
of helping them to understand that it's not hardcore drugs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. That's so funny.
yeah.
Now, looking ahead, I mean, you're obviously have a pulse on both the wine, like the alcohol and the cannabis beverage industry. Do you see any interesting trends on the horizon for cannabis beverage?
Ah, I you know, the hardest thing, the best way to predict is through historic baseline, and we don't have that in
Right.
cannabis, right?
Yes.
So what you start leaning to is you look at other markets or look at, outside of cannabis, what's happening. So I do see cannabis beverages is increasing in market share. It's still a small base.
Mhm.
So I do see that people are using cannabis beverages sometimes as a replacement in the same occasions that they would do alcohol. So I suspect we'll see more and more of that
Mhm.
as stigma reduces. We also know, right, like during dry January, there's a large percent. I read it and I don't want to spit out the wrong percent, but I think it was like somewhere in the 70 percentage of people still during dry January, they transition from alcohol to cannabis. That's not part of their dry program.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So there's quite a bit of trial that happens in
Right.
January. So I do expect as people open their mind a little bit, stigma reduces that beverages, as well as gummies, which are already doing it, will start replacing those occasions, will become more and more popular. And as they become more en masse, we're going to see the same kind of beverages start selling well that are in alcohol or non-controlled substance, if that makes sense.
Right. And the people who are doing a dry January, but then still continuing to use like a cannabis beverage instead, are those people who would they be like non-traditional cannabis users? Like they don't typically consume cannabis or it is already part of their current
It sounds like
routine?
what I read an article in the Hamilton Spectator, and it did indicate it didn't give me that indication of either one, but my assumption on that would be a bit of both, to be
Okay.
honest.
Right.
There's people that are already consuming or just like, hey, no alcohol this month, but I'm continuing.
Right.
And then there's those people that are okay, no alcohol, but hey, this might be a better, healthier option
Might
for me.
make the month easier than
And
just going completely dry. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Oh, that's pretty interesting. And then also you mentioned about like the market share because I as I understand it, it can't like you said, cannabis beverage is still a pretty small market share as far as like all the cannabis products available. So why did you go for a beverage versus like an edible? Because edibles are a larger market share than beverages.
yeah. Well, beverages number one are my passion.
Right. I guess that I
Number
guess that
one,
makes sense. That's the obvious answer.
super passionate about beverages. But number two for me, it's enjoy like um it's a nice long enjoyment, right? Like
Mhm.
I pour sheesh and I pour it over, like I said, ice, glass, garnish, like it's an experience beyond just, don't get me wrong, I enjoy gummies, I enjoy brownies, all of those things, but it's quickly consumed.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And I wanted something that gives kind of an enjoyable experience, something I'm used to that I can integrate easy in my life. It's not an odd moment. And that made just a lot of sense to me. And in fact, it's not that I'm not like Sheesh will explore edibles. There's no doubt. Um,
Mhm.
but we wanted to come out first and foremost with what we know best, and that's
Yeah.
our focus.
Yeah, and that makes sense too, because like you said, if you're popping a gummy, like that's like a 30-second, you know, thing. Like
Mhm.
you pop it in your mouth, you chew it up, and then that's the end of it. Whereas, like you said, you have your sheesh glass and you pour it over ice and you make like that little ritual, like you're making a cocktail or something, or
Right.
pouring a nice glass of wine and savoring it. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right? Even, we have the cherry, but we have a tangerine dream out as well. And I remember, like, we had 18 different tangerine purees I brought in before I picked the right one.
Oh,
That
wow.
they're from California, right? I'm like, "This is the one." So when I'm sipping it, I know that. I'm going, "Oh, I could taste that puree." You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
it's I don't know. I like making it a special, thing. Yeah.
So with all your experience in the wine industry, are you sommelier? Like you must
Nope.
have quite a palate to be able to like
I
taste 18 different tangerines and be like notice the difference between them all.
Yeah, I do. I developed quite a palate. Similar to kind of coming into cannabis, when I went into buying wine, I didn't have a background in it. My background was in category management, analysis, right? Making decisions based on analysis. So I took the business part, and I was really fortunate enough to have a team, some working with me and for me, master of wines,
Mm,
sommeliers, some of the best in the industry. So I learned a ton from them, but also from the process. Like, we would get thousands of submissions to buy 40 products. So we would have to
right.
taste hundreds of those, like 100 typically in a tasting room. And when you know what to look for, yes, your palate does develop that way. So I'm always, even when I'm approaching a pre roll, which I don't do inhalation products a lot at all, but when I do, I look at it just like a wine. I'm smelling it for the aroma. I'm looking at the quality of the bud, which
Mhm.
like the color. I'm pulling very gently, trying to taste the whole experience, and then feel the feels. Just
Right.
so it's very similar. Only my teeth aren't as red. If that
Yep, there's nothing that says you've been drinking red wine like those red wine teeth that
That's right.
that
That's
you just can't avoid, but,
yeah,
that's just part of the whole thing about drinking red wine. So,
100%.
yeah. Now switching gears just a little bit, what would surprise people about you?
Oh boy, that's a that's a tough question, Margaret.
I love this question because the answers are often as surprising as the question itself, so
Yeah, yeah, I would have to say, uh, a lot of people are shocked when they get to know me, that I was in the military.
Oh, that is
Yeah,
surprising.
that's right, that's right.
Wow.
Yeah, I was in the infantry, reserve when I was young. Yeah.
So, what does that mean exactly? Did you serve were you in a war or
No.
anything?
No, I didn't
Okay.
make it that far.
Right.
No, I joined the reserves, in grade 12. Long story, I was on our student council, and a gentleman came in, to the school and was recruiting for this, like, summer program to kinda expedite things as an infantry person, and I went to kinda get everybody excited and try to bring people to this meeting. And I guess through that process, I signed up, other people signed up, and next thing you know, I got a call saying, "Hey, you've made this program." And I was like, "What?"
You got
And
I signed up for anything?
I know it was this moment. I did testing, and anyway, I did it as a personal challenge for a couple years. Then when I went to university, I said I couldn't continue. It was I was focused elsewhere, and that wasn't a
Yeah.
future.
Yeah.
But yeah, people. I'm quite the marksman. Who knew?
That
Markswoman.
is very
Who knew?
surprising.
Who
Yeah, you
knew?
don't yeah, you have infantry training, that's impressive.
That's right. It does
Yeah,
shock some people that have handled live grenades. So,
yeah,
but yeah, that's a bit of a surprise. Yeah.
yeah. Well, that's a great answer, so I'm glad I asked,
Yeah,
but
no.
and is there anything that coming up that you're excited about or anything coming up too with Sheesh Hash Colas that you're
I
excited about?
I wake up excited every day since I've
Yeah.
been in this industry. I have two things really exciting. So one, I have a book that's coming out. I think pre-sale starting this fall, and it's called Chill, uh,
Okay.
the wine lover's introduction to cannabis. So it's where I bring a lot of the history and synergies between cannabis and wine together, just to educate people, reduce stigma, and like I said, if people know more and educate themselves, then they can decide and be empowered on if there's a place in their life for them. So that's one thing that's got me pretty excited. The other thing, of course, is Sheesh. We have new products coming out, and there's a new innovation I'm working on behind the scenes that I'm hoping comes out next summer. Um, that I think is going to be next level exciting. So yeah,
That does sound exciting on both fronts because, I mean, obviously new products coming out that for those who are listening and can't see your face as you're talking,
yes,
you have quite the smile on your face talking about that. So I would be excited. And next summer is a long time to wait,
yep,
but a book coming out too. You said Chill, the Wine Lover's Guide, Intro to Cannabis.
correct.
And you'll have to let me know when the pre-order is available because I would definitely be interested in that as a wine lover myself. But I just think that that's really going to obviously speak to people who are really into wine but are curious about cannabis too.
100%. And it talks about the stigma I had, and maybe they can relate to going into it, right?
Right. And the stigma that a lot of us had, because especially if you're of a certain age, of a certain vintage, if you will, then, like DARE programs. And I remember the assemblies at school and if you smoke cannabis, you're going to be shooting up heroin within a month, like all that stuff that's obviously untrue.
Right,
And but some of
right.
that stuff really hangs on and it's hard to sort of shake that feeling when you were indoctrinated with that kind of stuff. So yeah. Yeah.
100%. It's exciting.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. Well, Jackie, I just want to say thank you for spending your time with me today. This has been a really interesting conversation. And where can people find you online?
I'm 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 more of a LinkedIn girl.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. LinkedIn. And I know you have Sheesh Hash Colas
We do.
on Instagram
Yeah.
for sure. I don't know if it's on Facebook or not, but I tend to be more on Instagram. So I'll link to those in the show notes.
Thank you.
And yeah, I just want to say thank you for sharing your time with me today.
Margaret, thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate it, and it's always good talking to you.
Awesome. Thank you.